Hello everyone and welcome to day 3 of our YAML training. So we have learned in the previous sessions on how YAML looks and what are the basic syntax and how does it work. So today we are going to move to something more practical and more powerful, which is the use of mappings, the listing and the nested structure. So this is an important step because many real YAML files are not just simple key value pairs, and the reason is they often contain groups of related information like multiple items in a sequence and sections inside sections, and that is what makes YAML so useful for describing systems, the applications and the infrastructure. So what are mappings? The very first item that you see here, the mappings part. So let me explain what is mappings and then I'll explain you what is this code about. So a mapping in YAML is simply a group of key value pairs, right? It's just a group of not one or two independent, but they're a group of key value pairs, and it is a way to describe one object by giving it several related fields. For example, you can describe an environment. So here you can see I'm describing an environment with a name, that's production here, and then the region, and I can even add a version as well. So that's the reason I told you it's going to be a group of key value pairs. So I have multiple key value pairs and it has been grouped under a value called environment. And again, mappings are very common because they help us organize information in a logical way. So when you read a YAML file, a mapping often represents one thing, one single thing. It could be a service, it could be a server or a deployment setting, right? So that's all about the mapping. So as I told you, just remember one quick thing. It's simply a group of key value pairs, and it's to describe one object by giving it several related fields. So for example, when you're explaining about your environment, your Kubernetes environment, right? So you're going to explain the name of the environment, the region where it has been hosted, and the version as well, right? So that's about the mapping. And the second one, which is the list. So lists are used whenever we want to group multiple values together. So in YAML, a list is written with a dash, as I told you here. So in fact, we even saw that previously. But again, you have a dash and then a space before each item. So this make it easy to show several entries in a clear sequence. So you might use a list to define the ports. You can use it to add the containers, the dependencies, or even the environments. So lists are very useful when a configuration needs to contain more than one item under the category. For example, I even discussed this in a previous video. Like if I have multiple containers under the same pod, I can give them like this. Like I have a container called name, a web, and then I have a container called API. So I am giving this in list. Okay. And then the next item, which is combining maps and lists. So previously, at the very first beginning, we saw about the maps and then we saw about the list. So here we're going to combine the maps and the list. Um, so the real power, I should say, of YAML appears when mappings and lists are combined, because a mapping, as you know, it contains a list, and a list contain objects and that have their own mappings, right? So mapping contains list, a list can contain objects and that have their own mapping. So this structure allows us to describe complex system without losing the readability part. So for example, a service section here that you see. So what I'm giving here is I've added two entries, one for a web container and one for a API container, and each entry can have its own name. So I have it here. It has its own name, and it has its own image. So here it has its own image, which is Nginx, and here it's API. And then I have even given the configuration details as well, like the ports, the database URL, and every single information. So this structure, this YAML structure, allows us to describe complex systems without losing the readability. For example, a service section might include two entries, one for a web container as you see here and another for an API container, and each entry can have its own name. It can have its own image. It can have its own configuration details. So this is a very common pattern in Docker Compose. If you have used it, you must have known that by this time. And then the Kubernetes manifest and even other modern DevOps files. So now the critical part. So why does this matter in DevOps? So this structure that you see here, the mappings, the list, and then the object which has been mapped. So this structure is not just a theoretical one. It is used in every tool that the engineers work with them with every day, every single day. So Docker Compose files use nested mappings, as you know, and the list to define the services and their settings. And again, Kubernetes manifests also rely heavily on this style to describe the pods, the deployments, and the configurations. So when you understand how mappings and lists work together, you can read and write many real world files with much more confidence. And that is why this topic is so important for anyone who is learning the YAML for cloud automation or DevOps work. And again, a quick example that shows how this idea fit together. So coming back to this example here, I've got even a practical exercise as well. So create a YAML file representing a small system, one service called web, one service called database, and a list of ports for web and environment variables for database. So let's quickly create it one for us. So I'm going to create a YAML file, which I'll start with the services and then give a tab web. Web is going to be my first uh, service starting with image. So I'm going to use Nginx image and then the ports. So image and ports are mapped under the web, right? And now under it, I'm using the list. So that's why I've given this dash. So anything that comes with dash is going to be your list. Okay. And then the ports, and then I'm gonna create my next service, that is the API service, followed by the image. So that's going to be the mapping of it, my API, and then the environment, followed by the database underscore URL. I'm going to give the database URL as db. Yep. So this example, what I did is the service mapping, the services that you see here, mapping contains two nested service objects. One is the web and the other one is API. And each has its own field, and the web service also include a list of ports, the 8080. And this is a very practical representation of how the YAML structures data in real system. And some of the common mistakes that we might make in the initial days, which is when working with mappings and listing, as a beginner, I usually ran into a very few common issues. Like one of the most common is the inconsistent indentation, and another is forgetting a list item that can contain its own nested structure. And thirdly, mixing up when something should be a mapping and when it should be a list, right? So you forget to mm, you get confused with like what is going to be the mapping values and what is going to be the list values. Okay, and finally the good news here is these mistakes become easier to spot once you start practicing it with small examples. So as you continue learning, you will be able to build a stronger sense of how the structure should work. And yep, the practice exercise, as I told you, I've created an service with two I just missed this one here. This is going to be the db, and I'm going to use my image which is called my db. And again, database URL, yes, it's going to be PostgreSDB. So again, by practicing this structure now, you'll be able to be much better prepared for the more advanced YAML topics that's going to come next. So until I see you all in our next video, it's bye bye from Vasant Shanmugam and your favorite Vasant Cloud Talk YouTube channel. Take care and bye bye.